In today's episode of Powerhouse Tactical, we'll be discussing some sensitive subjects. It may not be the smartest thing to do when you're trying to start out a new YouTube channel, but the truth is what we're striving for here. So when you watch this, try to watch it with least amount of prejudice and try to form your own opinion, and you're welcome to share them in the comments below. A more honest and closer look at the affirmative action today on Powerhouse Tactical. A couple of days ago, a U.S. District Court announced the decision in the Harvard University versus Students for Fair Admissions group in the favor of Harvard University, stating that using a race as a factor in the admissions process was constitutional. With that said, I wanted to take a look at what the current state of affirmative action in this country was. Many argue that America is still being plagued by systematic racism. Minorities are still being discriminated against in educational and occupational arenas. Certain minority groups are also disproportionately underrepresented in the leadership of this country. So is it factually correct? Well, the country's split in that view. But in this picture that is being drawn as bleak, dark, and just hopeless reality, there is a beacon of hope, a light that shines upon the future of true equality. Affirmative action. Affirmative action began as an equal employment opportunity initiative by President Kennedy in 1961, mainly for the government contractors and their workers. The initiative remained largely as a government contractor and their workers program until the late 70s. In 1978, the U.S. Supreme Court made the decision on University of California versus Bakke case for the University of California, and upheld the use of race as a factor in admissions process. This was when university affirmative action became widely known and publicized. In 1995, University of California voted to end affirmative action in their admissions process. So the applicants' merits and abilities would be considered regardless of their race, gender, ethnicity, or country of origin. Getting into the 90s and 2000s, the frequency of groups legally challenging affirmative action became significantly more frequent, which tells us that more and more people are unhappy about affirmative action in the recent few decades. So why do we even have this thing called affirmative action in the first place? To simplify this discussion, the whole affirmative action argument is essentially a debate about justice. When we think of justice, the Lady Justice, she's blindfolded. Therefore, there's no way she can see anyone's race, gender, color, ethnicity, or any of that. So everyone is treated equally, therefore everyone is treated justly. Of course, unless there is a morally relevant and legitimate reason why someone should be treated differently than others. So, any benefits or burden should be shared according to this premise. So in the case of affirmative action, we are faced with a question of if there are situations that is fair for certain race to be treated differently, solely based on the fact that they are of that race. That question brings us to the concept of compensatory justice. If one were done wrong, it's justice that the one should be compensated for the wrongdoings. We can all agree that that is the right thing to do. So the affirmative action began with the premise that various wrongs that were done to the black community, the black people as a whole in this country, should be compensated by giving that community some special treatment, an edge to get ahead, to have that equal footing in the society. Well, I think there's hardly anyone that has half a brain that would disagree with that sentiment. It makes sense, obviously, which is why the affirmative action has been accepted widely, and it's been around for so long. It sounds good, feels good. In fact, it even does good. And not only that, it makes logical and moral sense to have affirmative action. So, what is the damn problem? As with everything in life, affirmative action isn't perfect. It never was. And I must argue that it is actually far from being perfect, especially as a solution in the 21st century America. From the get-go, the affirmative action was envisioned as a temporary remedy that would eventually end. As with most government-mandated social engineering programs, it started out with great intentions, moral intentions. It actually did a lot of good as well in increasing the level of participation by minorities and women in the areas of employment and education and many facets of society. Then, instead of weaning off of it, right, once it did what it was set out to do, we should have weaned off of it. But affirmative action continues on, and not only just continues, but it continues to expand. Except now, it is creating more harm than good, in my opinion, and also some others will claim. The notable case in 1978, the Alan Bakke versus University of California case. Alan Bakke, Mr. Bakke, the white male, who had been rejected by University of California Medical School for 2 years in a row, while less qualified minorities were being accepted. U.S. Supreme Court ruled against such rigid quota system where no matter what, 16 people from the minority community had to be accepted. So they did away with a very rigid quota system, but it upheld the whole idea of affirmative action itself. This was the first major publicized case of reverse racism, or the claim of it, by affirmative action. America was built on the idea that everyone should be treated equally in accordance to each of their merits. Not what their lineage was, who their father was, what their last name was, and so on. Aristocracy was out. We don't like that. This is America. Meritocracy is the new way. Affirmative action puts race and or gender as the dominant factor. This, frankly, destroys the whole idea of meritocracy. Even when a student who happens to be from a minority group, but comes from an affluent, well-to-do family, works really hard to earn their spot at a university, it becomes very easy to dismiss their earned merits and say, oh, he got here just because of this race. He is because of this color. The stereotypes and racism continues on, often because of affirmative action. There's also a risk of organizations that follow affirmative action guidelines will suffer themselves. Imagine, what if we try to apply affirmative action to the NBA? There are gross underrepresentation of Asians and whites and other groups in the NBA. Mandatory 10% should go to the disenfranchised Asian players, and 30% to this, 10% to that, 20% to that. You cannot have more than 50% of the players that are black. What would that do to the league? It would completely destroy it. The games will be so bad that only people who watch NBA games will be the mothers of the players. Literally. The point is, when the positions are filled in an organization with less qualified individuals because of affirmative action, the performance of the organization as a collective will suffer, inevitably. This is not to say, don't get me wrong, please do not get this wrong. This is not to say that minority candidates are less capable. Not at all. Plenty of minority students get into Ivy League schools purely on their merits. They deserve it. They don't need their race card to get in. It actually is disservice to those students when all their hard work is dismissed and belittled, and people automatically assume that their acceptance was thanks to affirmative action. It completely demeans any true minority achievements. And those students that actually get in to these universities, thanks to affirmative action, too often cannot keep up. And this is not because they're not smart. It's just that they weren't ready for that level of performance. In order to survive, if they don't drop out already, they gravitate towards less and more easy type of majors. And this is a huge loss as a society and a missed opportunity for that individual. You know, they're majoring in some kind of liberal arts, some obscure cultural studies or something like that, when they could have gone to a less prestigious school and studied hard and gotten into like engineering or medicine. Did affirmative action really help this person, help this race, or even help this organization? And this is another weird element. Some proponents of affirmative action will argue that affirmative action creates diversity. That is such a crock of fertilizer. People who say that, in my opinion, not all of them, but a lot of them, are actually racists. While affirmative action may create diversity in skin colors, it doesn't necessarily create diversity in ideas or even culture, for that matter. Not all black people think a certain way. Not all Latinos speak Spanish. Not all Asians like fried rice. Well, actually, that last one, the Asians, we do like our rice. A lot. And another point is, while it helped with serving justice in the 60s, throughout 70s and whatnot, it has been quite hurtful in the entire nation's racial relations since the mid-80s and on. The whole Harvard versus Students for Fair Admissions case is just another example of the series of backward steps that we are forced to take as a nation due to affirmative action. Asians are a minority. Asians are underrepresented in the society. So instead of affirmative action being used to help Asians, why is it hurting them? While white candidates complain that black and Latino candidates get accepted with lower grades and test scores than the whites, the Asians are actually on the opposite end of that spectrum, where Asians actually have to get higher grades than the whites in order for them to be able to get into these Ivy Leagues. Why? Because there will be less diversity if they accepted Asians on their merits and held them to same standards. There will be just way too many Asians in relation to other races, is their argument. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying, treat Asians like other minorities. That is completely not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is everyone should be treated equally, like everyone else. Not blacks, not Asians, not Latinos, not whites, but just treat everyone as fellow humans, as fellow Americans. Thank you for watching. God bless you, and God bless our republic.